Hello YouTube and welcome to another Cassandra tutorial. So today I'm gonna show you how to configure authentication and authorization in Apache Cassandra. So are you ready? Let's get started. So first thing first, let's define what is authentication and what is authorization. So actually authentication is how applications and users are allowed to log in to the Cassandra cluster, okay? And authorization deals with granting permissions to database objects like key spaces and tables. So as you may know, Cassandra allows you to log in without any credentials. So let's see that in practice. So first of all, let me see if Cassandra is running. So I will issue the command service Cassandra status. Okay. So as you can see here, it's running. Okay. So as I told you, I am able to use the SQL or Cassandra query language shell without any credentials. So here I'm on the system without any authentication, but we can change that. Okay, how? So I will show you. Actually, you can edit the Cassandra YAML file located in /etc/Cassandra.yaml. So this file contains all the configuration needed for Cassandra. So if I open this file with any editor you want, and let's search for the keyword authenticator. Okay, authenticator. So as you can see here, the authenticator is set as allow all authenticator by default. So that means that you can log into the cluster without any credentials. So if you want actually to change that, you can. So if you want, you can change, for example, allow all authenticator by password authenticator. Okay. So if I change that, I will save my file. Actually, I forget a very important thing. So I have to be root in order to change that file. Okay. So let's execute this command with root privileges. Here we go. I will search for the authenticator. Okay. So I will change that keyword with password authenticator. So now that I have saved the file, I have to restart the server, or actually the service. So I will do sudo service Cassandra restart. So now the service is stopping and starting again. Okay. So now let's try actually to log in to our Apache Cassandra. So Cassandra query language shell. Connection refused. So sometimes you have to wait a little bit in order to get the connection. Okay, so here you can see the messages I'm waiting for. Authentication failed, you know. So remote and requires authentication. So that means that changes that we have made to the Cassandra YAML is effective, so we have to provide credentials in order to log in. So you have to keep in mind, by default, actually Cassandra has a default authentication. I will show you how. So in order to provide it, you have to type Cassandra query language shell minus user is Cassandra and password is Cassandra. So actually we call that a role. So this is the default role for Cassandra. So with those credentials you can log in to your server. Okay. So now, as you can see, we been enabled to log into the Cassandra cluster. Okay. So I can describe, for example, the key spaces that we have here. So we have the system schema table, the system authentication tables, and the system distributed. And if you remember from the last video, university key space example. So one important table here that we have to take a look at is the system authentication table. So let's use this key space actually. So this is not a table, this is a key space. So we'll be using it, system authentication. Here we go. So let's see the table it contains. So I'll describe the tables. And voila, you can see that we have a set of role related tables. Okay, so as I told you before, a default role that exists in Cassandra is called Cassandra. So let's see what is inside the roles table. So I will select all from this table here called roles. So you see here the name of the role, which is Cassandra, and the salted hash is actually the password which is encrypted using salt algorithm. Okay, and here you can see it's super user, which is defined to true, which means it's super user role. Okay, so everything about authentication and authorization is managed using role. So you have that to keep that in mind. Okay, so now let's create another role. Okay, so we can do that very easily. So let's do the process once again. So I will be using the default role Cassandra, because if you want to create a role, you must log in using a role. So here I'll be using a role Cassandra by default in order to create another role. Okay, so now I'm logging. In order to create a role, it's pretty simple. We create a role and we define its name. So let's, for example, create a role called read only user. Okay, here with login equal to true, and we have to provide a password. So let's, for example, just make it between quotes, and we'll be using user as password. Okay, so now I have created a role, so we can test if that role is actually functioning. So let's exit again, but remember the name of our role is read only user. So I will exit. So let me clear that. So instead of using the default role Cassandra, I'll be using the user read only user, and password is of course user. Here we go. So now I gained access to our cluster. another method that you can use in order to test your role. So let's say that you have been logged in using Cassandra. So inside the cluster, you can just use keyword login, then the name read-only user. Okay. So here you will be asking to give a password, which is user. And you can see that the prompt has changed from Cassandra to read-only. Okay. So let's see, for example, the different key spaces. I'll describe key spaces. Here we go. So let's use our famous key space name, system authentication. We have the tables. And remember the table name roles. Normally now we should have another role added. So I'll actually select all from roles. And voila, you can see that we have another role named read-only user. Okay, with the hash or salted hash password. Okay, so now we have configured authentication. Let's now move on and configure authorization. Okay, so as I told you before, authorizations deals with granting permissions to database object. Okay, so let's see, for example, that we want actually the role read-only user to just have select permission to specific table, for example, or specific key space. For example, our test key space university. So in order to do that, it's pretty simple. First, you have to use the default role Cassandra. Okay, here we go. And now let's configure the authorization. So we grant select. So this is actually the syntax, grant select on key space. And here we give the name of the key space that you want to grant select permission. Okay. Actually, I forget here, grant select on permission on key space university. 2, here we have to provide the role, which is a read only user. Okay, and but here we have an error. This error is, as you can see here, grant operation is not supported by allow all authorizer. Okay, so actually this allow all authorizer is actually also a default keyword in our configuration file, so we have to change it in order to grant this operation. Okay, so I will exit. I will open once again our Cassandra config file, this one here. Here we go, and here you can see the keyword authorizer, so we have to change that to Cassandra authorizer. So I will delete the allow all. I will replace it by Cassandra authorizer. Here we go. I think I'm done here, so let's save our file, and of course we have to restart once again our cluster Cassandra. So service Cassandra restart. You have to wait sometimes, always. Okay, so let's try to log on using the Cassandra role and execute the same grant permission. Okay, so if you see this message here, unable to connect, it means that you have to wait a little bit. Just sometimes it takes some time in order to log into your cluster. Here we go. Okay, now let's execute the same grant syntax. Grant select permission on Keyspace University to read only. So actually the syntax will allow the user, or the role actually, read only user, just to select from the university keyspace. Here we go. Now you can see that the grant keyword has successfully executed. So let's test it. So remember, we are still using the Cassandra role. So let's change to the read-only user role that we have just granted select permission. Okay, so the password is user. Okay, now I'll move on. Let's describe the key spaces that we have here. So let's try, for example, to use the system authentication key space. So I will use the system authentication. Here we go. So describe the table or the tables, and let's try to select the content of the roles table. Normally we don't have that permission, but let's verify that. So as you can see here, unauthorized error from server. So the user read-only has no select permissions. So we have successfully created read-only user. But we are done yet. Let's test it on the university and confirm that it can select or use the select keyword in university keyspace. So I will change to use university keyspace. Here we go. Let's describe the table. Normally we have only one table, students, if my memory is good, and let's select all from student. Here we go. You can see that the read-only user can actually select or use the select keyword in the student table because it has all permissions, or it has only the select permission on university keyspace. He cannot actually modify or insert records in this table. Okay, so let's log in this time using Cassandra. Here we go. I will use this time or before that I will show you some useful keywords or commands. List role. So here it will shows you all the roles that you have in your system. Okay, and now let's use the key or the system authentication key space. Okay, I will describe the tables once again. Okay, now let's see this, or let's select records from this rule permissions. Rule permissions table. So here you can see clearly that the role read-only user has actually a select permission on the resource, which is data in university keyspace. So inside this system table you can view actually the permissions to role. Okay, You can also use another command, list all permissions. Here we go. Which another view, here it shows you the role, username, the resource, and the permission. Okay, so you have to keep in mind, if you want to configure authentication or authorization in Apache Cassandra, you must actually change some defaults in your configuration file, cassandra.yaml file, and all that. You can also, or you must actually create roles in order to deal with authentication and authorization. So that was just a brief introduction how to use authentication and authorization in Apache Cassandra. As always, I hope it has been informative for you, and I want to thank you for viewing. Bye bye.